So it's honestly, I've only been at Blizzard since October, and I really feel honored to be such a part of such a talented group of guys. And I also wanted to mention before I kick it off that I'm really sort of blown away and humbled and honored to be here in front of you guys. I've never talked in front of such a group that I know and respect so much. So I appreciate you guys being here, and it's amazing for me to be here. All right, I wanted to kick it off with a few quick questions, so I know a lot of you guys, but I want to sort of see who's here today. So raise your hand if you're on the buyer side, if you buy art assets, or if you buy outsourcing. Nice. Okay. Sweet. That's a good percentage. All right. So now, of you guys, who's like an art director type? Okay. Who is like a producer type? Organization. All right. A few more hands there. And then who's an executive? Who's the big boss man? Got one or two of those. Nice. All right. And all right. So now, who's on the vendor side? If I could see. So that's almost 50-50. That's pretty cool. All right. So from the buyer side, I'm hoping, I'm going to ask the silly question, but who here has actually spent money on outsourcing? I hope that's everyone, right? So, yeah, nice. All right, so and just to get a judge of volume, so okay, as everyone over, who spent $1 million on outsourcing? Yeah, okay. 5 million? Keep your hands up. There's a few. Anyone over 10 million? Wow, that's a lot of money. That's awesome. So that sort of goes to my point. So there's a lot of money being spent by us, and what I really wanted to talk about today is respecting that process. This is a big business, and we're spending lots of money that's not ours, but we really need to treat that with. Let me advance to make sure before I get started. Questions? Okay, so the basis of this, you're spending a lot of money. The idea is essentially to build trust both with the people whose money you're spending, as well as the people you're spending the money on, and respecting yourself and keeping that whole process sort of flowing well. When I first joined Blizzard, I sort of gave an internal talk about outsourcing and why I believe in it and why I'm so excited about it. And in all the infinite wisdom of everyone in the room, they look at me, they go, yeah, Grayson, that's really cool. I believe that you have a dream about this, but you also need to make sure you have a plan. And I do have a plan, but I got so carried away, and I'm so passionate about making this work and getting so excited about it. I'm like, that's right. I need to not forget to verbalize my plan and communicate that out to everyone that I work with. So a lot of today is, yes, have a dream. I have a dream, and I also have a plan. And make sure you do the same in your outsourcing as well. Also, I make sure that, so these are sort of baseline stuff that I just wanted to mention before you even get into the real talk. But essentially, I make sure to communicate that outsourcing is not a silver bullet, and it will never be. Mainly, as part of the stuff today is essentially, it's not a silver bullet, and it doesn't always work. Be very verbal about that, and specifically in terms of firefighting. It just doesn't work that way. And I'm very clear about that to everyone who approaches me with, hey, I've got $1 million, I want to do some outsourcing, I need all this stuff done by next month. No, I'm sorry. So part of that is learn to say no, or at least not yet. Okay, cool, you have $1 million, you want all these assets, that's great, but no, next month doesn't work. Give me 3 months, give me 4 months, give me 6 months. We can make that work if we plan ahead. And so I try to always be very clear about that, and I think that's part of, I want to spend your money well, and I'm not going to blow it just because we need stuff yesterday. And the last one I'll mention before I get started, if anyone's familiar with the DISC psychological profile system, I am a high C, so get ready for data and charts and graphs. It's going to be awesome. I'm excited. Yeah, I'm a very low I. All right, let's get into it. So what I'm going to talk about today is I broke up it into 3 sections, and they might seem a little bit disconnected, but I really believe at the end of the day, these all sort of contribute to success of spending money well and success in the whole outsourcing pipeline. The first one is do your homework. So this includes the metrics of how and why you're spending the money in the first place. Number two is how I believe, or my pitch on one way to essentially build a crew or a team to treat the assets that you're paying a lot of money for with respect and deliver the product that you're spending a lot of money on. And the last one is brain science, and this maybe feels disconnected, but again, I really believe that this contributes to the success of doing your homework and setting up the crew and just making sure this whole process flows smoothly. And I geek out over it a lot. I've taken a few classes recently, and it's really interesting stuff. So I'm going to cover very briefly some cool stuff that's hopefully kind of fun. All right, so let's jump into it. So the first part is doing your homework. The idea is to spend the money smart. All right, so this is the first topic I'll mention, but this is not necessarily in any sort of priority order. I debated for a while about putting up a big chart with a world picture and like numbers per region, but I think by the time you'd get home that it'd be out of date. So essentially what I wanted to say here is there's going to be different market prices per region just by the virtue of exchange rates. There's nothing we can do about that, it just happens. But the big thing I wanted to mention here is just be aware of competitive market price per region so that if you get multiple bids from multiple vendors all over the world, bids are going to be higher, bids are going to be lower, but you want to know if that bid is high or low based on the competitive market price for that region, because that will tell you something. If you go get a bid from a region and it's wildly high, maybe you found the best guys in the region, but maybe you didn't. Either way, you should still be asking what's going on here. If you found the best guys in the region, hell yeah, you're doing great. If it's wildly low, then you got to ask the question of, wait a minute, well, am I paying you enough money so that you can hire the best talent in the market, in the region? And are you going to be around in 4 years? Because I want to build a long-term relationship. I want your studio to be healthy and continue to be around so we can continue working together for a long time. Yeah, make sure they have solid talent. And I debated on putting the numbers up. I feel like I maybe should have. But anyway, I think there's a lot of benefit. And a lot of you guys sort of already do this naturally. But it's good to, literally, this is not even my full vendor list, but this is a portion of my vendor list. I just plotted it on a Google map. And that's sort of what it spit out. It's kind of fun. Google Maps is a great API. It's really fun. All right, moving on. So the next portion of it, I really like this. So this was done by Colin Harmon. He's a designer and art director in Atlanta, Georgia. He's on the design, illustration, sort of advertising side of things, not at all involved in games. But sort of ever since I got into the game industry, we all know about the triangle, right? Fast, cheap, or great. And ever since I've heard this story, it's essentially you get to pick two, right? And in my experience and what I've seen so far is actually you get to pick one. That's it. and I think really pushing towards, well, at least you get to pick one with the person's money you're spending. So if someone comes to me and says, okay, here's a bunch of money, we want to do a bunch of outsourcing, what I try to focus on is really being honest about my goal, that person's goal that I'm spending their money. What do they really want? Do they want fast? Do they want cheap? Do they want great? I think each of those has its time and place. That's fine, but the point is to be honest about it. Don't go in there thinking you want something fast when really the person who brought you this dump truck full of money wanted great. And sometimes it takes a little bit of work to sort of investigate to find out what really their goal is and what you can help them with. Pick one, there's a time and place for each, what's truly most important. And I also wanted to show this because please don't ever base any of your decisions just on mandate rate. It never makes sense to me. And the next slide will talk a little bit about why it's not good to just base on a mandate rate. So if I went out and got two bids, okay, one vendor comes back with a nice low mandate rate, and another vendor comes back with a big high mandate rate. And if this is all the data I had to go on, well, I'd be like, well, shit, like, why shouldn't I just go with the lower one? But that's not the whole story. And a lot of you guys know this, but essentially, mandate rate is money per day. So, okay, the second part of that equation is how long do they take to build something? And this is not an always thing, but I wanted to use this as an example. Essentially, someone has a low mandate rate, they might be slow, and it might take them a while to build an asset. Or if they have a high mandate rate, they might be fast. It's not always, but in this equation, essentially, it's the same. And so it's an overly simplified example of don't be scared off by a high mandate rate. And don't be lured in by a low mandate rate, because at the end of the day, you might wind up paying the same. And my gut says that in a situation where you're spending lots of time on something, internally, you're going to be burning a bunch of man time, you're spending internal dollars, and then that's a whole other story. So really, your price on the left side might be even higher because of the internal dollars spent. Let's see, yeah, don't be scared off by high. Find out your vendors, transition into contracts. Okay, so now, let's talk about contracts. So now you've found your vendors, you've got your bids, you're sort of happy what's going on. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of contracts, but I want to talk briefly about the two main types of contracts that I've seen. Fixed priced asset contracts and time and materials. So in fixed price asset contracts, essentially, pre-production is super important. If you go out without a blueprint and you ask someone to build X amount of characters for X amount of dollars and you don't give them a proper blueprint, that's bad. So pre-production is very, very important. I believe it's very efficient because it keeps a very hard light on the process for that exact same reason. You're spending X amount of dollars per asset. And if it moves one way or another, if your vendor's spending a whole bunch of extra time, if you're only paying them $4,000, if they're spending $6,000 internally, that's going to very quickly bring up that conversation from them to you going, hey, we need to talk about this. In a time and materials, that might not necessarily happen because you're just paying by the day. All right, that's fine. If a character takes 3 times as long, that's fine. But I believe in the efficiency of the fixed price. It is rigid, so be aware that if I sign up for 10 characters, it's not cool to then say, hey, could I get 5 characters and 5 vehicles? That doesn't work that way. But I'm going to talk in a second about why I believe that the rigidity is actually a strength. You can already tell which way I like, unfortunately. With time and materials, it's longer term. There is a safety to it. The vendors say, okay, well, cool, I've got a year-long contract for 6 guys or 12 guys or 30 guys, whatever it is. So it seems like a good deal. It's flexible process. So maybe if I wanted 30 characters, 5 vehicles, and then I change my mind halfway through and those numbers flip-flop, that's okay. So there is some benefit to it. And same thing, sort of flexible process and flexible output. If I wanted you to rip AO maps and I wanted you to do the characters in one way and it changes, okay, the process changes. And then flexible output, same thing with characters, vehicles. At the end of the day, it's flexible the whole way through. All right, so now I sort of already hinted at which one I like. I really like short fixed price contracts. And all the vendors are going, oh shit, Grayson, what are you doing? But I believe this is a strength, and here's why I believe this. If you treat your contracts like a sprint, and we've all done agile development, and we say, okay, my user story to you is this. Here's my blueprint. Here's what I want. Here's what we're shooting for. There's a certain amount of commitment to that. There's a certain amount of predictability to that. You know that I'm not going to come in halfway through the sprint and change up the game on you. And the reason you keep it short is so that if, in my position, I'm between the creative game development team and all you talented folks out there that are producing the assets for me. So if the creatives come to me and say, hey, we want to change it up a little bit, keep the contract short and say, I'm sorry, you can't change it up right now. Give me a month. We'll finish up this batch of work, and then we'll talk about changing that after. So that sort of goes into controlling feature creep. So it's like, hey, I want my characters to have 5 arms now. That's cool. Let's finish up the 2-armed characters, and then we'll talk about in the next contract adding the extra 6 arms or whatever it is. It controls iteration, so that if you signed up for $4,000 characters and you sort of anticipated 3 or 4 revisions, and you're coming back in at 12 revisions, first off, something's wrong. That's not good. But it also sort of encourages that conversation to say, okay, well, we're in the middle of this contract. The iterations are much higher than anticipated. you can address that problem either by saying, okay, let's see what we can do really quickly before the end of this contract, and the next contract, you have the opportunity to come to me and say, Grayson, you guys are picky bastards at Blizzard. We need to talk about this before we sign another contract. So I think there's power in that, is you can come to me and be very open about like, so 4,000 the character's not working. We need to talk. So I like the iteration. And the last part I wanted to mention is it forces transparency between the idea guys, the designers, the game developers, and whose money we're all spending. So if the designers are asking for 500 vehicles, in some situations, the guys actually spending the money might not know it's 500 vehicles and 0 characters. They're going, wait a minute, like, I thought the game we were making had some characters in it. So I really like that every 2, 3, 4, 5 months, I'm going back to whose money I'm spending with the designer's request saying, hey, this is what they want, this is what I'm about to spend some money on. Cool? And they go, yeah, sounds good. And so they are sort of forced to be tapped into really the asset production of it all, because sometimes even in internal development, you know, if you go on vacation for 2 weeks, you have no idea what the guys are working on. And that's sort of why I like outsourcing, because everything's locked in. Like, I know I'm spending your money, here's what I'm spending money on, here's when it's going to come back, and as long as they're happy and you know what I'm doing, then everything's good. Let's see, hard-led iteration, people requesting change, making sure they're in sync. Yeah, we're looking good. So, all right, so we've got these short contracts, but then all vendors are like, well, how do I stay in business? How can I hire a guy for 4 years or whatever? You know, I want to make sure that there's some sort of security here. The idea is really there's two things I wanted to talk about here is always, 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 always start slow, crawl, walk, run, build up, and then keep moving. And so then the gentleman's agreement between me and everyone in this room is essentially, hey, if we're going to do work together, that one contract's cool, but I need a little bit more than that to stay in business for a long time. So the idea is start slow, build up. Once you get fast, then it's like, okay, cool, let's talk about it. Am I giving you enough feedback? Do you have enough information from me? Is everything going well? Did you underbid? Did you overbid? You take the learnings from that and say, okay, cool, start the second contract. And then what you get is a nice flat production, nice flat predictable input to the vendors, so the vendors say, okay, cool, we have a steady amount of, this is ideal, honestly. So this might not happen always, but this is the goal, essentially, is take your learnings from each contract, and whether that's 3 months, whether that's 4 months, whether that's 6 months, make sure you have sort of bite-sized chunks that that have very definite start and ends, and you take the learnings from each and roll those into the next contract. Yeah, what we do is very creative, and so I really believe that sort of sectioning it up like this offers safety but flexibility. So you have a guarantee from me that nothing inside of that is going to change. And I think there's power in that. I'm not going to change the blueprint on you halfway between the contract, just like a sprint, hard lead and duration, and it keeps the people spending money in sync. Let's see. Next up, all right, let's move on. Tracking. So the tracking is the metrics of it. This is what helps you make educated guesses. So if the person whose money I'm spending comes into my office and says, all right, I need X, Y, Z in this sort of date, if I'm doing a good job at tracking, having the metrics in my back pocket, this will help me make educated guesses, sort of back of the envelope math kind of thing. All right, so let's kick it off. So if I go out there and I get 3 bids, cool, I've got a character bid, I've got a vehicle bid, I've got some prop bids, and if you look at that and go, okay, cool, those look reasonable to me. But if I'm doing a good job and I've been tracking the historical data, either if I've had multiple bids or I've had historical data from the work I've done in the past, now I look at it again and go, wait a minute, the character bid I got's a little bit low. Vehicle bid seems on contract, all right. On target, the prop bid seems a little bit high. Why? This could be 1,000 things, but essentially the character guys could be getting more efficient. It might be a new vendor, and they might have not quite understood how complicated your character was. With the props, they might have, someone might have misunderstood the documents you communicated to them. They might think that it's more complicated than it needs to be. Or that could just be the way you're trending. But either way, track this stuff. Put it on a graph and then look at it and then analyze it. Just to make sure you fully understand what's happening. It could be something you're doing. It could be just the situation. It could be just exchange rates fluctuating. So, but it's good to know this stuff. So that when someone comes in the office and says, "Wait, why are we paying double the price for our props now?" You have an understanding of why. All right, let's move on. So as part of that, okay, so cool. We've got bids back. We sort of understand what we want to do. We have a reasonable price for it. Okay, how fast can we get X of Y back? I want 50 characters I want 50 characters. How fast? Keep a good understanding of vendor holidays, vendor availability. Did EA just come in and buy like all of their time? It's good stuff to know. So keep tabs on that stuff. Bastards. No. And then average asset times, or did Blizzard come in and buy all their time? I'm sorry. Average asset times too. I mean, so all this stuff sort of leads into like, if someone walks in and says, "Hey, I want 50 vehicles," I've got the perfect team for it. But if they're on holiday and booked up by someone else, and you just made a promise that you can't keep, so keep tabs on this stuff. There's a lot of good resources out there. There's fancy ways of essentially linking in external online calendars into your Outlook so that you can view like every country's holidays in one place. Mix that with your own sort of tracking to say, hey, this vendor's booked up until this date, and they only have character artists available, whatever. So keep track of it. It's good to know so that when someone comes in, you can look at your calendar and say, okay, cool, this looks like the best vendor, and here's when they're available. So, and by the way, I should mention this, the little orange loot thing in the corner. After the presentation, I'm gonna give you a link. As soon as I get back to the office on Monday or Tuesday, you'll be able to download a bunch of cool resources about all this stuff. There'll be, I should have talked about it before, but anyway, you'll see that in the slides later. I'll put the slides up as well. It's a lot of cool Excel sheets, essentially templates that I've sort of built over the years that just sort of help track a lot of this stuff. So if I remember, I'll talk about it as we go. What is this next one? So this is, so the biggest part that me personally, I always forget about, hey, all right, how fast can we get something back, is I always forget how long legal takes. It takes a very, very long time. And you can try to work on that and optimize that process by feeding them with booze and stuff like that. But it just takes a long time. And I joke, but it's also bidding. Like it takes a week to properly say, hey, here's what I want. Ask questions. All right, cool. Here's the answer to that. And do you fully understand it? Okay. Do you feel comfortable making a bid? Okay, now make a bid for me. Does that look good? Then I need to measure it against my data. And then okay, I get back to you. It takes a week. That takes a long time. Legal takes a long time. And then counter signatures, even just for FedEx to do their thing, takes some time. You need to account for this because all of a sudden you're 2 weeks in and you promised a delivery in a month and a half. So shit, now you're down to 4 weeks. That's quick. Let's see. Okay, so now's the fun part. Now I'm going to share some super secret Blizzard information. Just kidding. I'm sorry. I can't show you anything. That is an actual Blizzard chart, unfortunately. I had to blur out everything. So the cool part about this, and as sort of part of the loot, I will give away, I've been carrying around a template with me that does track what you're seeing here. I was going to make some bad joke about Half-Life 3 that this confirms that, but anyway, it's a terrible joke. But essentially what this is I wanted to show it's always good to sort of have a master document to track a whole bunch of information all in one. So if you're doing your homework and you're doing a good job, you're keeping tabs on sort of the oil temperature of your vehicle, let's say. So I've got spending over time. I've got number of assets over time. I've got average cost per asset type that we talked a little bit about before. I've got the total cost of all the outsourcing I've done spread across all the projects or just one project. I've got friction cost. I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but essentially friction cost is my salary. I cost money at Blizzard, so every hour that I spend on an asset, that's what I call friction cost. And I'm very open and very clear about the friction cost per asset. And that sort of rolls into my total spending on outsourcing, and I'm very open about, okay, if we were to do this internally, here's the price it would have cost. If we go externally, you're spending money on me to sit in the office and pay for my air conditioning and all that sort of stuff. But that all rolls into a total price, and ideally, and I'm very clear about that, saying, we're still saving a little bit of money. That's not our main goal here, but I just wanted to show you that I look like an extra cost. My team may look like an extra cost, but here's why it makes sense, and here's why it still makes sense. So, but we'll talk more about that later. If your friction cost ever goes over 15%, that's bad, and we'll talk about that more in the team setup section of this. All right, so why do we track all this stuff? In my understanding, in my heart, I feel like you're serving three masters. You're serving the customer, that's the game team. You're serving the financial executives, you're spending their money. These are the people, yeah, that's the millions of dollars. And then your team, so the team that you're working with, you know, you need to be a good manager and all that sort of stuff, and you need to offer them, you know, make sure that they're having fun and contributing to the process. All right, so the customer, it's what assets do they want, what characters, what vehicles, and when do they want it? So are they happy? Are they happy with the quality that's coming back? What do they want when? And financial guys, EP, project managers, all that sort of stuff, they're going, all right, how much money are you going to spend? When are you going to spend it? So all that data and all that tracking, you can say, I predict that we're going to spend X amount of dollars this winter, this quarter, this year. So if you really do a good job, it's super easy to pull that data. You just chop it off and say, all right, well, last year we spent X amount. I think those guys are going to ask for essentially double that, so then, okay, we'll be right here. And the last one is your team. So what do you need to make all this happen? You need to make a bunch of assets, and you're going to spend a bunch of money, but who are you going to do it on? So all that tracking, all that data sort of helps you target and understand that process as well. So now, we're going to move on to G.R.I.P. G.R.I.P. is Global Resources for Interactive Production, and it is a very, very silly acronym. But it's for a type of team that I think everyone should build. And it's a picture of a deck crew from an aircraft carrier, and for me, it feels very connected. So moving on, so what is a G.R.I.P. team? So all the art managers and all the outsourcing art managers in the room, you are the perfect beginnings of that team. The second part of that is embedded artists dedicated to outsourcing as part of your team. So let's say you function as sort of producer, maybe a little bit of art director, maybe you're filling in, but essentially the way you scale this is by having these third-party art leads. And why it feels very connected to me to the deck crew of an aircraft carrier, those are very expensive airplanes up in the sky, and I'm not going to land them on an aircraft carrier without these guys guiding them down. So don't do outsourcing without G.R.I.P. team leads, and I wouldn't land a plane without these guys down there. All right, so we're going to talk briefly about how it works and then why I believe it works. All right, so let's jump into how it works. All right, so you've got your dev team, you've got all the art vendors all over the world, and here's how I believe the G.R.I.P. team functions. Essentially, it is an additional force to the dev team that essentially is the bridge between the dev team and the art vendors. It's really about building trust on both sides of the fence. And so I talk about trust with the people's money you're spending. This is the process you're spending the money on. So you better have trust inside the development team, and you better have trust with the vendors that they believe they know what you're talking about, if that makes sense, that you're not disconnected, that you're not just a producer just shoveling feedback over the fence. Inside, the G.R.I.P. art leads, they act like artists. The artists look at them and say, oh, that's just another artist. He just happens to act like 15 artists. That's pretty cool. But they trust him. That's the sort of the key thing here. And they're low impact on the development team. So the key resources, the art director, the character leads, the environment leads, all those guys, it's not like those guys are supporting 15 external artists. They're supporting one guy. Yeah, you have to, if I'm the art director and I go over to one of the G.R.I.P. team leads, I have to review 15 assets, but it's a much more casual shorthand than it would be if I'm the art director and I sit down at a computer and review 15 art assets, or 30 or 40 or 50. So I think it's much lower impact from what I've seen. On the vendor side, you get a partner. You get someone that's invested in the process, a true believer. He's hired only for this. He's not a part-time guy. He's not an artist that's just giving you feedback as quick as possible so that he can get back to making the art himself. These guys are functional artists. They can build the art themselves. They did train up with the internal development team, but they are dedicated there for you. And I think that offers a lot of partnership. they're there to put in that extra 10% of effort that, yes, it takes a little bit extra time, but if you're dedicated, that extra 10% makes a world of difference in efficiency. I truly believe this. And it's in their best interest to grow the external vendors and to really make them a part of the team. Not just, oh, it's those guys that I need to give feedback that are in another country or down the street or wherever. They're truly invested in making you part of the team, because the better they do that, the more efficient it is, the quicker they can kick back and have margaritas. I wouldn't do the same. So let's say I was an artist sitting next to another artist. I wouldn't cut him off and just sort of pitch feedback over the fence to him. I'd show him my screen, and if I see him doing something wrong, I'd sort of lean over him and say, hey, dude, did you know the process we're doing? It's like this. And you have to have that same relationship. That person just happens to be sitting right next to you. So it makes the process a little more challenging, but not impossible. And you need to understand it has to be the same thing. And so those G.R.I.P guys are there to do specifically that. So I talked a lot about this, but I'm very passionate about this, and I really believe that this works. So let's talk about what happens when you don't have a G.R.I.P team. All right, so you've got the dev team, you've got the external art vendors. They connect in directly to the development team. Then you're going, wait, that's a good thing, right? They connect directly in. But what happens is you wind up losing key development time. And these guys, my guess is they signed up to make art. And if you then tell them to say, wait, okay, you need to then now 20% of your time, 30% of your time, 50% of the time, you need to be giving feedback to art vendors. You're going to get a mixed bag. You'll get some believers in the process. You'll have some guys that truly understand that these are partners, external, team that they want to bring in, but not all the time. So what that causes is essentially they'll just be shoveling feedback over the fence and saying, okay, I just want to get back to making my character or making my environment or lighting or whatever. And it's not their fault. They signed up to make art. And if I walked over to them and said, hey, dude, now you're doing outsourcing, it's like, well, wait a minute, that's not what I signed up for. So I'm not trying to make these guys out to be bad guys. I'm going to really butcher an Einstein quote right now, but essentially if I'm judging a fish by its ability to climb a tree, everyone in that equation is going to lose. I'm going to lose because I'm not going to get the quality of art that I wanted back. The artists on the team are going to be, angry because I just want to make art, and now I'm giving feedback. What the hell? And the vendors are going, this guy's giving me shitty feedback. I don't understand. Like, I'm not getting the information I do. I need to do my job well, and I'm sure no one's happy by what I'm delivering just because I feel left in the dark. So I've seen it work okay like this. I just don't believe that's ideal. We'll move on. All right, so we talked a little bit about what a G.R.I.P artist does. And then, so the next question is going to be like, why the hell would anyone want to be one of these guys? And it does look a little bit funny on paper. And if I look at it and say, why would I want to be I'm an artist, why would I want to be just dedicated to outsourcing? I'm very passionate about it personally, but how can I convince another artist? There's more of them out there, I think, than you realize. And I think there's a lot of power to it. And there's a lot of opportunity in there. The first one is if you're a mid-level artist and you want to step up and you want a direction opportunity, this is a perfect opportunity. What more of a challenge than to direct 30 guys on the other side of the planet? That's a big challenge. That's fun if you look at it the right way. It's variety. So 1 month you're working on characters, 1 month you're working on vehicles. The next it's, it could be particle effects, animations, it could be anything. So there's a lot of exciting variety there. And there's ownership. I mean, if I'm a character artist, I'm delivering character every 2 weeks or whatever it is. And that's fun, but imagine delivering 10, 15, like how cool is that? To look at the game when it ships and say like, holy shit, like we did half the art in that game. How cool is that? That feels good. So sort of the quick, damn it, I'm about to go over time, but the quick story I'll tell here is I was starting up a G.R.I.P team at Sony Online. They'd never done outsourcing before. This artist came in, Adam. We hired for a G.R.I.P art lead, and he interviewed, and I told him all about this team that I want to build, and I'm so excited about this outsourcing thing, and he said, all right, you sold me. Like, that sounds pretty cool. I'll give it a shot. But just wanted to let you know, when I come in, I'd really be interested in moving over to the character team. I said, all right, that's cool. I appreciate, give me a shot. Let's see how it goes. I want you on the team. So he came in, he ramped up, and the character team goes, holy shit, this guy's awesome. We want him on our team now. They approached him a couple months later and said, we want you on our character team. And he finally goes, you know what, guys, I'm happy. I've got direction opportunity. I've got variety. I'm not just doing characters. I've got ownership of all this stuff. And I have an almost identical story with all the rest of the G.R.I.P leads. So I believe that if you set it up correctly and you run it correctly, you'll have real ownership by this team that you build. They really get to know the vendors, and they're really partners, and they really appreciate that. It's, you can be a part of the character team, but why not be part of something so much bigger? I believe there's a lot of awesomeness in that. You just need to show it. All right, so let's quickly talk about how many art leads you need, and we're going to talk a little bit about friction. Essentially, that's a very simple equation. So if I have a number of assets, all right, so I've got 20 characters, and I need 10%, and my friction is 10%, I need 2 art leads. So essentially, you times it by the percentage, but essentially what that works out is you're going to be, with this equation, it helps you plan so that you know how much support you need to get a certain amount of assets done. And I'm very clear about this to the people whose money I'm spending going into it, saying, all right, well, if you want me to outsource 500 things in 6 months, I can tell you exactly how many support people I need to do that. I'm one guy. Like, I can find you the vendors, I can help set up the contracts, I can even help you with a little bit of the artwork, but essentially, like, this needs to scale by the proportion of outsourcing that we're doing. It's not just I show up and all of a sudden truckloads of outsourcing shows up, and no. So this equation helps me to keep an eye on friction. If I set a 10% friction goal and I have a certain amount of assets and I have my 2 art leads, then if something's not working, then if friction goes up, then I need to take a look at it. Either we're not communicating properly, either we're outsourcing the wrong type of assets, but something's going on and I need to analyze that fast. So I believe that it's always good to be tracking that number. Let's see. Helps me plan and helps me keep an eye on friction. Yep. If you're over 15%, something's going wrong. 15% is my sort of take at a good number. If you're spending more than 15% of your internal time on an asset, something's going wrong. All right, let's move on. Why? Oh, there's the rest of the equation. Anyway, there's 20 assets, 10% too. All right, moving on. So why I believe it works. All right, so they're invested in the workflow. They're invested in the direction. They provide examples, and they essentially, as part of those examples, there's art examples, there's videos, there's docs, there's whatever it takes, and it's going to vary by the type of asset you're working on, the vendor you're working with, but those guys are dedicated to doing what it takes to get the information out there to make sure they're part of the team. And it's just a little bit of extra effort, and it makes such a big difference. All right, so I think we're gonna skip over this part pretty quick. So you'll recognize this from before. This is what it actually looks like. It looked initially like they're bolted on, but I essentially wanted to show that they're just embedded artists, and the other artists just see them as funny colored artists, but they connect to such a powerful resource outside of the studio. And that's why I think it's so useful, because the internal team sees them just as artists. The external team sort of taps directly into the development team without disturbing sort of the natural rhythm inside the development team. All right, let's keep moving. With no G.R.I.P, and there's G.R.I.P, I wanted we talked a little bit about this, but essentially you'll lose time from key assets on the team to review and feedback. Loss of flow and multitasking. Flow is very important, whether programmers or artists. If you're going through an asset and then you have to stop 75% of the way through your day to focus on feedback, that's a different story. And then you lose efficiency. And it's really easy to get into an us versus them situation. And again, it's not really their fault. It's just they weren't hired for that. They're not dedicated to it. And longer, more expensive contracts. Because of the loss of efficiency, everything's going to stretch out and you're going to spend more money. So with a G.R.I.P, it's focused, efficient feedback loop. The dev team stays focused on their tasks. The G.R.I.P team can take the shorthand reviews, turn them into whatever the vendor needs. I'm going to say longhand, but it doesn't need to be 1,000 times extra effort. It's whatever it takes to make them more efficient. more connected and in sync with external resources. That's great. Shorter, more efficient contracts. I believe that if you improve the friction, improve the relationship, you'll get more efficient, fast contracts. That's almost my time. Last section, this is a very short section. So to tie this all together, we need to not forget that we're dealing with humans. We all have this weird, very complicated brain that we're carrying around with us. If we pretend like we're not humans and we treat everything like a resource on an Excel sheet, even I love Excel sheets, but we're going to lose the point of what we're doing. So is anyone familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Raise your hand. There's a few people. OK, cool. So that's awesome. So I'll go over it very briefly for the rest of you guys. Essentially, I'm a human being. I have physiological needs. I need air, food, water. So in 1943, he wrote a paper called Theory of Human Motivation. So for me to be motivated, I need air, water, food. I need to function. I need safety. I need a roof over my head, that sort of good stuff. Then I need love and belonging. So I need friends. I need my wife to love me, that sort of thing. I need esteem, respect from others. I want to make sure that I get in front of, that I feel at least on the same level as everyone else and don't feel like everyone thinks I'm an intern. And then finally, you get to the end of it, which is self-actualization. Then I can solve problems. I can be creative. All right, so take that, 1943. Then this guy, David Rock, comes along. And essentially, the way I interpret it is David Rock comes up with SCARF. And what SCARF is, from my interpretation, is it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs for business. Has anyone heard of SCARF before? No, OK. So it's very similar. So the reason I mentioned Maslow is because I see it as very similar. It's essentially it's basically a threat reward where it's like, I want to go away from threats. I want to go towards reward. It's a survival instinct. So essentially, it's very similar. And from what I can tell, I don't think there's any order to these. I might be wrong. But essentially, I want to make sure that I come into a company feeling like I'm not an intern. I want to have certainty of my project and what I'm doing and sort of the continued work that we're all fighting towards. I want to have autonomy. I want to know that if we hit a problem, I have some sort of control over the problems in outsourcing or whatever, that I feel like I can just say, hey, Blizzard, I'm going to go give a talk about a bunch of cool stuff. And OK, that's cool. And then relatedness. So when I come into a company, that I feel like I'm connected to everyone, and that at the end of the day, I'm going to be treated fairly. This is very important. I feel like, and here's sort of my pitch. David Rock talks about it in terms of me managing people. If I have a team, I manage a team of folks. But I'm going to take it a little bit further. I believe that I need to demand that from my boss. So I need to demand certainty, status, autonomy, relatedness, fairness, all that sort of stuff from my boss. I need to then offer that to my team, and I need to include vendors. So everyone we're dealing with is a creative, driven, motivated human being. And I believe if we at least try to offer that and set those as goals, that it will improve everything that we do. And the key part about this is you need to do it not just when it's sunny, especially when shit goes wrong. You need to be there saying, you know what? I'm going to treat you with respect. I'm going to be fair about this situation. I'm not going to talk down to you. We're all in this together. So that's sort of my pitch for the soft sciences. I sort of really geek out about that stuff, and I truly believe it. So a quick recap. Do your homework. Track your metrics. Make sure you know what you're getting yourself into, and make sure you can sort of give predictable estimations when people come in asking to spend a bunch of money. Build the proper team to respect these expensive things that you're doing. And then finally, do not underestimate the soft sciences. I think it's important. It's the glue that holds all this together. And that's it. Thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate your time.